the exercises that people find very, very helpful, and it's good, especially when you're working on Act 2, Part 2, and you're a little stuck, is to interview the character. I mean, that is, which is you having an imaginary dialogue directly with your main character. You can do this with your villain. And the exercise is called the What Happened Was exercise. This is a bonus exercise that I usually, give only with and when I'm coaching privately, but I want to share it with you. And what you do is you take a leap of imagination and you say, okay, I'm going to interview my character. Now, you're going to do a few things. One of them is hopefully you'll do this at a time when you're a little sleepy, you're in a different space, you're very relaxed, because you will require your imagination. Then you're going to cast yourself as a character in the scene that you're now going to write, the interview scene. And you're going to make a decision that this is several years after the movie has ended. So you might be interviewing Dorothy now that she's grown up, and she's successfully gotten out of Kansas, and she, I don't know, whatever she does now. And then you as the interviewer, and you're going to decide, you play a role in this thing. You can be an anonymous interviewer, which is the least fun. You can be a bartender, you can be a shrink, you can be a friend, you can be a child. Some of the most powerful work that's been done has been having one of my students, after working on a historical drama about the Great War, having the main character tell his little grandson how the battle really went, because it was a case where we were trying to reconstruct a Civil War battle, and the writer was having a lot of difficulty with that. And I said, why don't we try this? What happened was, and why don't we pretend that that your character is interviewing you as his grandson, and you can ask all the silly questions that little children ask because you don't yet know. And I said, this may help us because you have been, this is a writer who had a big, what do you call it, a model of the battle, and he had, stick figures, and he kept moving them around. What's it called? A diorama. He had made a diorama. It was very elaborate. It was beautiful. He got real soldiers, metal soldiers, and he had it all set up. But he couldn't write it because he couldn't figure out how the battle had come down, when soldiers came in. And so I confess, he was a person who was prone to occasionally drinking a glass of wine, so I talked him into having one. And he then pretended, on one side of his paper, he took two sides of his paper, and he wrote, well, gee, Grandpa, so, what happened to the Battle of the Bulge? And then we had the character, play act and move seats, and the character will go, well, it went like this, grandson, and before we knew it, he was moving the soldiers in this diorama around, and I was helping, so I was frantically writing notes and drawing diagrams. And at the end, we had a battle. It was amazing. It was extraordinary. And then later, he was able to find notes from some general or something who had been at that battle, and what he had recreated in his mind was incredibly similar to what had actually occurred. It was really quite an extraordinary experience. But even if you're not doing a battle, I've done this with love scenes, where, the writer writes a love scene, the character's in a bar, and he leans forward and he says, I love you, will you marry me, and blah, blah, blah. And it's a terrible scene. And the writer doesn't know the characters, and we don't know what to do. And again, what is effective is to interview the characters separately. And again, it's many years later, they're either happily married or not married, and have each character tell a version of what they remember that experience as being. And because we're all so creative, I mean, whether or not you consider yourself a professional writer, and I would like to say that if you are writing, you are a writer. And I wish that people would say, oh, well, I don't know, I'm trying to write. The answer is, as Yoda says, there is no try, there is only do or not do. So, if you're a person who I suspect has been spending many long evenings home, not dancing, not playing, not watching TV, really trying to work on a story, I'm going to ask you, and this is a complete non sequitur, I'll get back to my point in a second, to please, please, please not withhold the appellation of writer which you so richly deserve. Okay, if you are writing, you are a writer. You may not be a professional writer because you may want to define a professional writer as someone who gets paid for their work, but you are a writer. And unless you know you're a writer, trust me, no one else will. And I go through this so often. So, it's like people who go on the moon. If you didn't put the stake in the moon and said, I claim this and I call it the moon, who's going to know what happened? So please stand by yourself and say, as of now, if you're watching this and you're really going to give this a shot, I am a writer. You do not have to tell your friends that because they may guffaw and laugh, but somewhere between you and yourself, make yourself a promise that you are going to try to understand that you are already a writer. Because those of us who are called to write are writers. Okay, let me get back to my point. So what happened was exercise is a very simple way of you getting parts of your plot that you didn't know. So let's say that you were writing The Godfather and you needed an Act 2, Part 2, and you had done everything, and you know that Michael, your character, had to kill somebody important, and then they had to go hide. And then you were really stuck, which happens a lot. One way to get out of this is to do the exercise, and again, you do it when you're sleepy, you do it in a sloppy way, you have to lower the bar, you can't worry about the outcome. You set a timer for 15 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever you think you can handle, and you take on the role of the bartender, the shrink, as I said, and you ask your character, well, what happened in Act 2, Part 2? And as a work of imagination, remember I said you don't have to worry about Act 1 and Act 3. You don't have to worry about Act 2, Part 1 either, because that's connected to Act 1. You just have to free form and have them make up something. And again, we're writers, so keep that hand moving for 15 minutes, or keep that hand moving for 15 minutes. I'm a big person, I like writing. And at the end of that time, go away, do not look at your writing, you never have to look at it, but go to the gym or something and come back and then read it aloud to yourself and see if you don't find some wonderful gem. And please let me know. This has created more fabulous original material than almost any of my other exercises, and that's saying something. Now, I know that we're getting very near the end of our time, so let me just wrap up and summarize. Okay, so next week we're going to talk about Act 3, which is the resolution of the dream, the forfeiture of the dream, or the finding and acting out of a new dream. Tonight we talked about Act 2, Part 2, which is ask the question and answers it, who or what would the character die for? We get to this part of the story by doing the following things. We answer the question, what is the character's dream, for Act 1. We acknowledge that that dream is going to be resolved, forfeited, or changed in Act 3. And we then look to Act 2, Part 1, and we infer the reverse. So if we've decided that Act 1 is the dream, as I said, it could also be the nightmare, then we can define the events of Act 2, Part 1, just the opposite, things getting as bad as possible, plus a tornado, as we discussed last week. And now we're only left with the difficult section, Act 2, Part 2, to write. And the question that asks is there something that my main character would literally or figuratively die for? Now, if not, you have a bigger problem with your script, which means you have to go back to Act 1 and get a better and stronger dream. But if you can answer the question, who or what would the character die for, which in the case of Witnesses we said is to be a good cop, you can then settle down and you can do an exercise like what happened was to find out what the events in that section will be. Or if you know them, you can simply lay them out, and then you'll be able to go on and finish your movie. So I am going to take a drink of water, and then I'm going to answer. I gather there are quite a lot of questions. I'm supposed to tell you that if you want to know more about this, you should go to www.screenwritermagic.com. And if you have questions for me in specific, you can always try me at the office. It's 212-600-1115.